Great. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share just a few slides with you. I'm trying to just describe as quickly and as succinctly as I can the situation that we find ourselves in. Because in all of the places that I am involved, whether it's in business or whether it's in the church world or whether in education or wherever I'm involved, you know, this is a 1 in 100 year event. So this is a 1 in 100 year event. So most of us won't live 100 years. And this type of event is such a shock to the system. So everywhere that I'm involved in, and maybe if you want to see all of this, if you're on Zoom, if you want to put it on presenter view, then you should be able to see the slide in its totality and not only small parts of it. But the thing is that we don't have enough information to make decisions, and there's just the sparseness of information, and we need to understand what this stress or risk is in the system. And it's only once we understand what the stress is that we can understand the nature and the depth and the dimension of it, and then can we only start deciding what the strategies are and what our businesses can do, or what I can do in my business, or what I can do in my church. But if we don't understand the dimensions of this crisis, my sense is that we won't be able to understand how to think about it, either in practical terms in our jobs, or in our spirits, or in our faith, or in our emotions. So I am going to give you the nuts and bolts of where we find ourselves, and then we'll talk about what to do with it. So the first picture that I want to share with you, just want to make sure that everybody can see it. Koketsu, you can see that all right on the screen?
Yes, I can see it all right on the screen.
Okay, great. So this picture is a very good description of the two issues that we are grappling with. When President Ramaphosa speaks, he speaks about lives and livelihoods, and that this is a time where we have to safeguard lives, but we also have to safeguard livelihoods. Now, what this picture shows is how the two things that we're trying to achieve are actually opposed to each other. So if you're trying to do the top part, and that is trying to flatten the curve, as they say, so the bold line there at the top is sort of an exponential increase in people affected by the COVID-19 crisis. And then the strategies that we are trying to do to suppress the virus is lockdown and social distancing and all of those things that we are all experiencing. So if you lock down people to save lives so that they don't get affected, if you then go to the bottom of that picture, the impact is that you lock the economy as well. Now that line at the bottom is, you see a little GDP there, so it stands for a gross domestic product. So that's the line that explains economic growth. So if that line goes negative, it means that the economy shrinks. And the moment that the economy shrinks, it means that people lose jobs, people lose livelihoods, people lose income, people lose food. So the longer that you lock down an economy, people in their homes, and you lock the economy, the more severe, or the bigger the contraction, or the bigger the negative impact on the economy is. And that's why you would have heard President Ramaphosa speak many times about it's the balance between these two things. And it's a very, very difficult balance to try to strike. So I thought maybe just to start off is to understand what the governments around the world are grappling with. And if you in a church, or if you're in a business, or if you're working for somebody, this is what we are grappling with. And it's such a difficult decision to make. So the next point that I want to then make is, when people talk about safeguarding lives, so the top line that I spoke about earlier, there's a lot of conjecture and a lot of talk about, South Africa and people in Africa, and whether we will have such a severe impact of this pandemic. And some of the reasons that people mention that we might not have such a massive fallout as maybe have experienced in the developed world, in the US, for example, or in Europe. I mean, just the extent of this impact of this crisis on the United States. So in New York alone, there's a person that dies of the COVID-19 virus every 2.5 minutes. So there's one person every 2.5 minutes that passes away as a result of this virus. So people postulate and they say, well, because Africa, the population is a lot younger than the US and Europe, that people are stronger and that we might be less affected. So that's one reason why they say we might be less affected. Then the prevalence of HIV in South Africa, and because a lot of people are on antiretroviral medication, also militates or fights against this virus. The other thing is that this virus spreads very, very fast between 5 degrees Celsius and 11 degrees Celsius. And this is just a picture of, even in our winter months, our average temperature in the capital cities is higher than that 5 to 11%. So another reason why we might not be so severely impacted from a saving lives perspective. And then the last one, the fact that we've got a fight against TB in South Africa, in most of the continent, and most of us have been vaccinated when we were young by the BCG vaccination. And the BCG vaccination seems to fight against this virus quite well. Just the two examples that I mentioned in Portugal, there is BCG vaccination. You can see that there's 266 people that passed away from the crisis or from the virus in Portugal, where there's 11,000 people, just the country adjacent to it in Spain, that has passed away from this crisis. So these are all reasons that you might have heard of why this crisis or this virus might not be as severe in South Africa. So we hope that this is true, and we hope that a vaccine will be brought soon. But by all accounts, it might be as long as 18 months before we have something to help safeguard lives. In the meantime, we have to still be in lockdown and all of those things, the terrible things that go with that. But then I want to just make the point on the economy, and all of us that work and live and breathe and have to be fed by the economy. This is a picture of a few scenarios that could play out. Now, on the y-axis, the axis on the left, it says that either the world is going to be able to contain this virus, and that's the bottom left, or there might be a resurgence or a reappearance of this virus across the globe, and that we haven't seen the end of it yet. So that's the y-axis, from global transmission contained to resurgent. And then there's African transmission, contained to widespread. So obviously, if the world isn't able to deal with this virus, then people will fly into South Africa again. They will bring the virus back into South Africa again. So we're dependent on the globe, the world, to fight the virus. But also in South Africa and Africa, we've got responsibility to fight against it. So now, there are 4 scenarios that McKinsey have put together. So they scenario 1, 2, and 3, that's the middle block you'll see there. And then they've just said what the impact on our economy could be. So just to make it easy for us, the bottom left is sort of the best scenario that we're looking at. And in that scenario, our economy will shrink. You'll see there, I'll put there post-COVID-19, our economy will contract, will shrink by 2%. Now, that is worse than in 2008 and 9 when we had the global financial crisis. So the best case scenario for this economy is still worse than the 2008 and 2009 fallout that we had. If you go to the top right, the worst case scenario will be worse to the economy than what World War II did to South African economy. So The worst case scenario is that our economy will shrink by 8%, and in World War II, or just post World War II, the economy shrank by 5%. Now, the reason why World War II would have been less severe on the South African economy is because a lot of people had jobs. We didn't have youth unemployment at that point that was higher than 50%. We didn't have unemployment at that point that was higher than 29%. So that's why, this is a very, very, very severe picture for the economy. And that's why a lot of countries have poured money into the economy. So this picture is a picture of the extent to which governments have pumped money into the economy. So on the left-hand side, on the y-axis, you've got the size of stimulus, the size of money or the check that the governments have put into their economies. That's the left-hand side. And then the bottom is sort of the percentage per capita. So don't worry about the bottom part. But you'll see that the United States, if the bubble is big, it means that it's a lot of money that the United States government was able to put into their country. But if your bubble is small, it's not a lot of money. But probably the most important is that the numbers on the side of the left-hand side. So African countries, bottom left, have all been sort of 0.1%, maybe 1% of their gross domestic product, of their money that they make in the economy. They were able to put as a stimulus into the economy. In other words, write checks and so on and so forth to help the economy. What President Ramaphosa did yesterday is he moved us from 0.1% of GDP, our gross domestic product, to sort of the size of the economy. And to date, we've only been able to get 0.1% of money to come and help our people to save their livelihoods. But with the announcement yesterday of 500 billion rands being put into the economy to help our people and to help the economy, it made a jump up from 0.1% to 10%. So if we don't have this 500 billion rand, we will not be able to fight an economy that will be worse off than the post World War II scenario. So it is absolutely necessary, in my opinion, and this is my personal opinion, that we have to have the package that the president announced yesterday. Now that package is, the first point there goes to small and medium enterprises. Then it goes into social grants, 50 billion. Then it goes into protecting jobs, 100 billion. Then there is 70 billion rands worth of tax relief, 20 billion rands that goes into municipalities to help to distribute food and services, 250,000 food parcels, and 100 million rands to frontline workers. So I sat there last night with my family, and I knew that we needed something big. And I hoped in my heart that it would be something to the tune of 10% of our GDP. So I was hoping for a stimulus package of somewhere around 500 billion rand. And it is what we need. But at the bottom there, my kids said, okay, but where are we going to get the money? And the answer to that is there's 130 billion rands of our existing budget, money that we had, that we will push into it. But the rest we will go and borrow from the World Bank and the IMF and the New Development Bank or the BRICS Bank. And my generation, your generation, and the generations to come will have to repay this money. So it is going to be a burden, this 500 billion, for a few generations. But if we do not have this 500 billion, we will not be able, in my opinion, to bring this economy back on track after something that might be as severe as a post-World War II economy. It is absolutely, absolutely necessary. And I'm thankful for the guts that the president had and the government had to step up to this plate. I think that the way that they're allocating it is effective. It's going to be in the implementation of it and whether we will be able to effectively distribute social grants, effectively distribute food parcels. So it's all in the implementation. It's not an easy task here. And that brings me to my point of what we can do about all of this. So this is the sort of the picture of what the economy will look like, what the 500 billion Rand stimulus package means, and who will repay it, and what it means to the rest of the economy. So I wanted to just give that picture before I then step into where to from here. Where to from here, there's a very good article that that came up on LinkedIn. One of the professors in INSEAD in France, Manfred Ketz de Vries, wrote an article about what the possible scenarios would be for the world after COVID-19. And he essentially said the world might go closed hands or the world might go open hands. And if the world goes closed hands, it will say, listen, we realize how connected we are. We are going to close our borders. We are going to close ourselves off to the world, and we are just going to live by ourselves. That is where governments might say, listen, in order to be secure, in order to be healthy, we need to give up some of our freedoms. So that's sort of the one way that the world could go. And the other way that the world could go is more open hands and said, listen, if something like this happens and happens again, we can only help ourselves if we help each other. And we just see that across the globe, the scientists that are working together to come up with a vaccine. When you speak to scientists, they just say it's never in the history of mankind have society and scientists worked so collaboratively together to come up with a solution for all of us. So if you ask me, so what's the world going to look like going forward? I start with two possible scenarios. Maybe the one scenario is that the US and Italy and many markets close, and they say we don't want to work with anybody else. We just want to work with ourselves. America first, that type of thing. Brexit, closing our borders for the UK to close our borders to the rest of the world. It could go that way. What I am praying for and what I am working towards is something that Scripture talks about, and that is an open hand. It's actually also the way that we've been put together. I asked my kids, what's the first thing that you're going to do when the lockdown stops? And my oldest son, he's turning 22 now. He said, well, I'm going to get into my car. I'm going to drive to my girlfriend. I'm going to give her a hug and I'm going to give her a kiss. I've been missing her for a long time. So we've been made to want to be with each other. Our little ones, they're in school, primary school and high school. They just said, we want to get to school. We want to go to our friends. We want to see our friends. So my prayer is that the world will not go to the left, to a closed-handed world where the rich just keep themselves rich and there's no redistribution of wealth into poor societies. My prayer is that the scriptural reference of justice and equity will be a world that we can work towards. So that's one of my prayer points, just my personal prayer points, is for the right-hand side of this picture as opposed to the left. But those are two scenarios that can play out. Then people have asked me, so what are the new economies or the new type of businesses that will come up? And the notion of, they call it the contact-free economy, is one thing that a lot of people are writing about. So they talk about digital commerce, Amazon, and so on, being the type of businesses to be part of. They talk about telemedicine, that medicine and diagnosis and prognosis and so on going into very poor communities, because we now have the ability to put doctors on the internet and on the websites and on telephone calls. So telemedicine, another business that will probably proliferate, and then automation of a lot of jobs will probably go that direction as well. So there's a contact-free economy. So that's sort of a global phenomenon. So maybe if you're sitting here and you're thinking, well, you know, this is like a horrendous outcome, not only for lives, but for livelihoods. But how can I be part of a future and part of a future South Africa that will be able to stand again and grow again? You might think of a career or business or opportunities in digital commerce, in telemedicine, also in automation. So the contact-free economy, I think, it's just been accelerated and will be part of our future a lot sooner than what we thought in the past. The other thing, though, for South Africa is the small and medium enterprises. Now, and the reason why government is just pushing so much money into the SMMEs, small and medium enterprises, small and medium and micro enterprises, and why it is so necessary to protect that part of the economy is because it employs close on 50% of all South Africans that are employed in the formal sector. Obviously, there's an informal sector with people employed there as well. But the small and medium enterprises in South Africa employs 47% of South Africans. Now, it's about 16.5 million South Africans that are employed of the 57 million, 16.5 million that are employed in the formal sector. So half of those are in the small and medium enterprises. It's about 20% of our economy gets driven by the small and medium enterprises. But probably most important is under the National Development Plan, the plan that government came up with that can drive our economy for inclusive growth. And what the president spoke about last night about radical economic growth. We rly on the SMMEs, the small and medium enterprises, to contribute 60 to 80% of the growth that we need, the additional growth that we need because of the National Development Plan running up to 2030. So if the SMME sector gets incapacitated or gets hurt in such a way that it cannot stand up again, one, we will have massive, severe fallout in unemployment, and we will have a very impaired ability to be able to grow our economy later on. So that's why there's some 200 billion rands that the government is pushing into protection of small and medium enterprises, an additional 100 billion rand to protect people that work in the informal economy and also in this SMME space. Now, in my day job, the first 10 hours of my work day, this is where I spend my day. I work with one of the large financial institutions, and where God has positioned me as a financier is to steward that 200 billion rand into small and medium enterprises, to put structures in place, to be able to bring government into it and to bring various parties into helping the small and medium enterprises. So that's where God has positioned me in my day job, to be part of that solution. But I think maybe, again, if you're sitting here and you're saying, oh my goodness, okay, I'm a young person, I'm in the middle of a 1 in 100-year event. What can I do? I'm not in that contact-free economy that you spoke about on the previous slide. My answer to you is this country needs entrepreneurs. This country needs people in the small and medium enterprises that can see needs in the market, that can see customer segments that have needs that are not being fulfilled, and that at this point in time can be creative and say, sure, okay, so maybe there's a small and medium enterprise that I know that maybe in my evening or in my mornings I can go and help and I can assist, and maybe there's more business that I can do on a small and medium enterprise basis. I think there's massive opportunity here. And in my evenings, I'm involved in that as well. So where I want to go now is I want to just show you an example outside of my day job. I see there's a question of how do you do it practically. This is my next point. So I'm in a large financial organization, and I do financing of companies and SMEs and so on. So that's my day job. But about 8 years ago, God arrested my wife and I's hearts to take some of our finances and to buy a property where we do marriage counseling. So we teamed up with partners. There's about 100 people every month that go through those marriage counseling courses. But we bought a lodge. We bought a property where there's game and there's rondavels there. And so the aim there is to help marriages. So people come there and they're on the brink of divorce, and you can see the husband is hitting the wife, and many of those marriages get a second chance at those marriage courses. Now, in order for that property to pay for itself, we also run a commercial lodge. So there's companies that come there for conferences and strategic sessions. We had Car of the Year there just a few months ago. And that small and medium enterprise, that's a medium enterprise that's in the part of the economy that came to an absolute standstill in the lockdown. So we had a great month. March was our best month that we've ever had, and it was like just broken in half with the lockdown that started in the middle of March. And sure, I just said to God, Lord, this business is going to close down. I mean, this is something that's on your heart. It's a property that's there to save and help marriages. And now, there's 0 rand that's coming through that. And it's amazing how God just sat me down and he said, listen, there's a crisis called COVID-19. So how can you use this lodge to safeguard lives? And we approaching government, and we're saying to government, if you need a space where you can quarantine people, as we are still going to probably see a massive uptick in these cases, come and use our lodge. You can quarantine people here on our lodge. So that's one way that we're using this opportunity. And then the other thing is safeguarding lives. And God has just opened my mind through prayer and through meditation. And he said, listen, he introduced me to somebody that just said, that property that you've got, if you turn it around after this crisis and use it as a place to be out in nature, to educate young people, to bring communities together through adventure camps and through riding horses and shooting rifles and riding motorcycles, bring communities together. You can deal with an opportunity of the crisis of education that we've got, the crisis of unity that we have in this country, and you can create jobs. And so now I'm busy writing a business plan to say, how can I pivot? How can I change this business of mine to then have an impact that is just much broader than serving companies and serving marriages, but also serving education, serving the economy, and employing people. So that's an example, a practical example of how business owners need to think about, okay, so I've got something, it might not work in the new economy, but I might change it. Then I understand that there's some people in the church world on the call as well. I'm advising some churches as well on how to think about and how to strategize in this difficult space. Maybe just quickly, I'll talk about that. So also I got a picture. So the relevance of the church, and then social distancing is just making it so difficult. So, or a pastor can say, listen, I'm going to close my church. I can't do anything. Or you have a pastor like Uketsa that says, listen, I have to do something. I need to connect with people in a different way. But that way is also quite, it's difficult because you've got a first lockdown. Now we have a second lockdown. We will have continued social distancing for many, many months to come. And then probably you'll have behavioral distancing where people realize that this is actually quite a dangerous world. So if you run a church in the old model of, gathering people, the relevance of the church in that gray line will just drop. But what Kuketsa and what many other people have done is they've gone into streaming services on Sundays and having e-communities like this one. And so I think that it's got a better chance. But if you're sitting on this call and you in the church world and you maybe a pastor or you're in that type of mindset, my challenge to you would be, how can you exponentially use this crisis? How can God exponentially use this crisis to have the relevance of the church just grow phenomenally? And what I'm thinking here is that, there's people, if you can reach them in their crisis. People have a crisis of faith. They say, I'm a Christian and now I've lost my job. I'm a Christian and now I've lost my income. I'm a Christian, I've lost a family member through this crisis. To reach those people in their crisis of faith, but also to reach people in their crisis of culture. I've got so many friends that I've never been able to talk about Christ with them. They know I'm a Christian and they know that I love the Lord and that's the way that I put my life out there. But now for the first time, in years, they're phoning me and they say, Boshoff, I've been holding on to nothing. I've been holding on to my job and now I don't have a job. Just tell me what you are holding on to. And I just think the church that is set up in a way that goes after the unchurched and the de-churched is also quite phenomenal. So there, I think the impact could be if you set up your church to not only help people in the crisis of faith, but also, I've got a misspelled word there, the crisis of culture. You can exponentially grow your church if you not only look after people that are in your church, but also set up your services and set up sessions like this one to get people in that have not been in a church, or they don't know God, they didn't want to know God, but now they don't have anything anymore. So that's the challenge, I think, for all of us. And then I'll just leave you, and then I'll go to questions just with these scriptures. So I'm a businessman. I'm an entrepreneur. I've started I don't know, probably 9 different businesses within our financial services group. I bought 2. I've restructured probably 5, 6 different businesses. But I don't have the tools to navigate this crisis. I've never been in a crisis of this nature in my almost 25 years of work. I've never been in this. And God just took me to Genesis 1. And he just said, that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth when there was nothing. It was empty and it was dark. And then these words, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And it is this Spirit that created. And it is this Spirit that lives in you and I. And when I close my eyes in the morning and I say, God, give me the creativity, give me the innovation, give me just insight beyond what I have. My 25 years in financial services and in small and medium enterprises have not prepared me for this. Lord, help me to be creative. This Spirit that created the world out of nothing is the Spirit that lives in me. And Lord, show me ways to be creative and innovative, to create work, to do new things. And, I don't have answers to questions that you might ask, okay, what should I be doing? But God has the answer. God that lives in you has the answer. And if there was a time in history, in the world, that we needed to call on Genesis 1, verse 1 to 2, this is the time. So The next thing that I want to share with you is 1 Kings 6 verse 7. It meant so much for me, to me in the past week. This is a section, 1 Kings 5 to 9, sort of talks about Solomon that built God's temple. And this verse says, while it was being built, the house was built of stone, prepared and finished at the quarry. There was no hammer or axe or iron tool or any kind what that was heard in the house while it was under construction. And this I just realized that when building something of the magnitude of building something like a temple for God, building a business for God, building a career for God, working in a school or in a church for God. You know, many times we want to be in there and, you know, we want to be heard and, you know, it's my idea, we need to implement this idea. But this verse says, maybe you're in a business or you working for somebody and, you know, you've got this great idea that God gives you through the Holy Spirit. And then you take it to your boss or you take it to your manager or you take it to somebody and they shoot it down. This is the scripture, and it happened to me just in the past week that there's something that God gave me. It's something that I believe that God wants me to do. I took it to the executive committee of our group, and they shot it down. And I said, God, okay, but what now? And he gave me this verse, and he said, you go and you build it, and you come up with the right ideas, and you get the right people to do it. You don't need the fanfare. You don't need the pats on the back. You don't need to be in lights. This is from me. Go and do it. Go and build a business case. And then after it's done, bring it back to the committee for their approval. So maybe this helps one of you that's on this call that says, but I've got this idea, but my boss will never allow me to do this. This is just to encourage you to maybe outside of the limelight, outside of the big noise and the hoo-ha, to go and think about with God and with some of your friends about this opportunity. And then after it's done, after it's finished and prepared, then bring it back. And then pray that your boss will see the finished product and say, yo, okay, so that could actually work. The last verse that I will leave you with is then Acts 13, verse 36. So here, the writer of Acts writes about David, King David, the mighty King David, David and his 300 men, David, the shepherd that beat Goliath, that beat Saul, that became king and unified Judah and Israel. And he writes this, he says, now, when David had served God's purpose in his own generation, he fell asleep. He was buried with his ancestors and his body decayed. And I read this verse and I thought, sure, this mighty King David had a purpose for his generation. And then his time passed. But what he did in his generation had an impact up until this day when I'm reading this verse, Acts 8:13, verse 36. So the next thing is that I just want to encourage each and every one of you, you have a purpose for your generation. If you do not fulfill this purpose, you will have wasted your opportunity to impact the world around you for God. He's got a purpose for you. He knows what he wants to do with your life. And you will come to a point where you're old like me and it's time maybe to move on. But the question that you need to leave yourself with it, was I busy with a purpose that God had for me in my generation? Or was I just busy with my own stuff? And I want to just encourage you to spend time, one, in innovation with God, two, in preparing things off-site to take into your business with God, and then lastly, to be busy with understanding your purpose very, very clearly with Him. Okay, so that was my story.